But we'd go down there. He went down a lot more than me, but it was beautiful. It's kind of like on the outside, right? Kind of like a peninsula.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
a
I
matter of
spent a lot
fact,
of time in
I start.
Baltimore though.
Oh yeah. Well, see, I'm from DC, and so where I lived at in DC, it wasn't really too far from Baltimore.
BC?
Yeah, Washington DC.
Like British Columbia?
Nah, Washington DC, Washington District of
Oh,
Columbia.
DC.
Yeah,
DC.
DC.
I
Yeah.
thought BC, like the
No,
whole
no, no,
thing.
no, no. Like Washington. Yeah, I was born in Washington DC.
Okay, alright.
Yeah, and
Do
stuff
you ever
like
get
that. So
back?
yeah, you said, what did you say?
Do you ever go back to DC?
Honestly, not really.
I mean, you grew up around it, but I haven't been there that often, but the few times I went, it's sort of like for
Mhm.
people who've never been before, the whole mall area and all the white old buildings and stuff, it feels
Mhm.
like I just took it for granted, but when I was there in person, it's pretty overwhelming. It feels pretty epic.
Yeah, it is nice. I haven't really gone back there like I want to. Like I said, I have a lot of, being as I grew up there, I have a lot of friends and stuff up there, and some family members still up there, but I don't really go up there that often. The plan was to start going up there more, but then all this stuff happened. So it's kind of like put a kibosh in that. My high school reunion was coming up actually, and it was supposed to be down there this summer. So I'm sure all that's going to be postponed now. And so, I don't really get to go there as often as I would like to. But honestly, but once you move away from an area after so long, the whole feel of it just seems different when you go back and visit.
No, for sure, for sure. So we should end this on saying what gut reaction right now, what is your favorite 80s movie?
My gut reaction now, if I were to choose one of my favorite 80s movies, I would probably just say Can't Buy Me Love.
Can't Buy Me Love,
I think,
I mean, perfect. I would probably, I mean, at the end of the day, I could debate it with myself all day long, but if I have to go with just the obvious tip of my tongue, it always goes back to Some Kind of Wonderful.
yeah, that was good too.
I mean,
And
they're all
that
good,
actually,
but it's a matter of like what do you really remember? What really connects to you? And like, there's so many. Every time I try to make a list of just 10 movies or this or that, I can never like. It's a barometer. It's more like whenever I make the list, whatever comes up to me at that time is maybe a barometer of where my head's at the time. But I can hardly ever make this is top 10 of all time. But what is that thing that comes up over and over again? Like for me, for all-time favorite movies, It's a Wonderful Life is, if I do make a top 10, that one is always there. And Warren Beatty's movies, Reds is always there. There's other movies that switch around, but when I think of the 80s, in terms of like the cliche sort of 80s movies in that way, the one that has always stuck with me the most was Some Kind of Wonderful.
and honestly, movies like that and Can't Buy Me Love, they really have a lot of plots that resonate, with everything that you're going through on a daily basis, really discovering who you are, discovering who your friends are,
Yeah.
not sure where you want to go in life, or you might be on a different path in life. So everybody can kind of relate if they really sit down and watch those movies to like their different scenarios, or even in their dating life, they might be in a
And that was
relationship and then realize
probably
they want more.
that was the first decade that, I mean, there was obviously in the 50s they had the teen movies and teens were always
Mhm.
like, pissed off at the world and they had that. In the 60s a little bit, but they were like beach movies and that kind of stuff and they're just fun. The 70s was not a lot. I mean, if you look up like teen movies of the 70s or teen movies of the, like you won't get a lot. And then you look up teen movies of the 80s or teen movies of the 90s and then all of a sudden they're all over the place. And that was really the first decade where teenagers like had a major, like had something in the movies that, that really, that they could connect to. And it wasn't, and even like people talk about, connect that to young adult books and stuff like that. People talk about that. It wasn't, I just read the other day that the book The Outsiders by Essie Hinton was written by this teenage girl, Essie Hinton, who was annoyed and frustrated about how much wasn't out there for teens. So this was in the late 60s. And then they released it, and it was total flop, like nobody read it. And it was put out on paperback, on the, little paperback book. And then the publisher found out that they were teaching it in schools. And that was the beginning. And then they repackaged it and sold it as a quote unquote young adult book. And that was the beginning of like this whole time. And then going into the 80s, the movies where all of a sudden teenagers had a plethora of characters that they could go to and relate to that was sold just to them. And then in the 90s, there were so many of them that all of a sudden The Craft and Scream made $100 million, and everybody was like, wait a second, we can make a lot of money doing this. And teens took over the world in the 90s.
And they're bringing Scream back again.
Not surprising. Maybe it'll be good. I don't know. The first one blew me away. I didn't really get into all of them, but it was definitely great at the time.
I think part 4 was good, but they waited too long to come out with it. It didn't make as much money as they hoped, and I think they waited too long because a lot of times if you're on a hit spree, you got to keep them coming. You know what I mean? Because Scream was one of those movies that I first remember when they would leave the theaters and they made so much money they would actually bring it back for a second go round. I think that's one of the first movies that actually started doing that. We'll leave and then come back a couple weeks later.
Well, back in the day, many years ago, because they didn't have TV as much even, but like in the 50s they re-released Wizard of Oz and stuff like that, so kids could see it because it wasn't really showing on TV yet.
But I would also like to add the reason why people probably relate to the 80s movies more is because I think they wrote teens more realistically back then. If I watch a lot of movies that they do today and the way they write a lot of the teenagers, some of it comes off as unrealistic to me and kind of cheesy.
Interesting.
Like in the 80s, it was more realistic. I just think they were more realistic because, like, even when I used to watch
they might be more kind of cheesy now. You're right. They might be more safe now. Like they were maybe taking more risks then because they didn't know.
Yeah, they're too safe.
They didn't have to answer to as many people then because they didn't know what they were doing. And now everyone's like, oh, this is for kids. Oh, we have to do the right thing. Yeah, I would rather, I have a teenager for a daughter, and there are times where even like, I would rather her see a rated R movie that is real and just talks about real stuff and deals with people in a real way than some PG-13 movie that's just like really, to me, negative about culture in a sense, like things that I don't want her, just the way girls behave and what they think is cool instead of being like the outsider who sets everybody straight about what's cool. Like you're right. It might be like in some ways, especially now maybe because this country is so divided.
Riverdale writes them pretty dark though. I thought about it. Riverdale does it pretty interesting.
Riverdale is kind of Riverdale is very stylistic and over the top and very like. Is it realistic? Do you think it's not more realistic though? It's more kind of like. I don't think what
happens in the town is realistic. I don't know. I guess like maybe the way their thought process.
The kids are running restaurants and. I guess I'm sure there's lots of teenagers who are. There are teenagers out there who probably are allowed to sleep over, and maybe their parents don't know they're in the shower together and that kind of stuff. But overall, I don't think that's a teenage experience. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a stupid old man at this point. But
you know what? Honestly, I think it just depends on the person's household. I don't know. You're right. When you go deep into it, like that part of it, then you're right. I'm sure the average household. But I guess
it almost feels. Do you remember? There was a musical from the 70s with Jodie Foster and Scott Baio about like gangsters, except they were all kids, but they were acting like adults who were gangsters. Bugsy Malone. It was called Bugsy Malone.
Okay.
But they were playing gangsters, but they were straight up like there was no adults in it, so they were like acting like they were adults. But their guns would shoot like potatoes and stuff like that. And it was crazy. But sometimes when I see Riverdale, it's like the teenagers are basically adults at this point. They're being written as adults who are like just trying to like be, which is cool. What's her name? Cherry Blossom, I think, is the funniest because it's so stylistic and the way She's written.
He's talking about Cheryl Blossom.
She's what?
Yeah, they're actually I think her name's Cheryl Blossom.
Cheryl Blossom, yeah. Yeah, and she's like out of an old like film noir from the 40s or something. I'm like,
Well,
did she just end?
here's a spoiler alert, though. I guess after they do once they finish what they didn't finish this season, I read somewhere where they'll probably just do a time jump where they'll actually be adults. So it'll be interesting to see how they write it.
And that makes sense because they're older. They did that with One Tree Hill,
Yeah.
right? Is that right? Where all of a sudden,
Yeah, they
because
did.
all the actors were old enough anyway, so they're like, let's stop making them play kids.
Yeah, because I guess they're going to skip over the college years and all that. But I could have seen some Riverdale. I guess because everybody was going to go to different colleges, I guess they had to come over to plot how to
Oh,
get them
you're
all
right.
back.
Maybe that's what they did with One Tree Hill too. That makes sense because I always wonder every time there's a high school show on air, I'm like, if this survives more than 4 years, and then not even because some of the characters are older, so they're going to graduate sooner. And then, I mean, Glee. I was like, what the hell are they going to do with Glee? And then they kind of made it work, but you could tell they were
Well, I
dancing
think
around it.
90210 made the transition from high school to college pretty good a little bit.
I don't
They all ended
remember
up
how
just
they
going
did
to the
it.
same. They all ended up going to California
Nobody,
University.
right? Because but they're already in like one of the biggest cities, and
Right.
so it's believable that they didn't really leave.
Yeah.
And of course, if they wanted to get rid of somebody, they could easily get rid of them at that point.
Mhm. I don't like that. I'll add this. I know it's off topic, but that Katie Keene show, the Riverdale spinoff. I haven't really been able to get into that.
I didn't try. I liked the trailer a lot I thought it would make a great movie, but then first of all, the other thing is like, nowadays because we're living in this time of, what are you watching now? Because we're all stuck at home. Like at first it's like you have all this time, you're going to watch everything. And I'm getting to the point now where I'm actually over it and I'm starting to get even more picky. Cause I'm like, I
Right.
don't really feel like watching a whole series again. So I'm being more, and I'm actually, at first, I like series sometimes more than movies because I like that sort of
Mhm.
like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Now I'm fatigued from it and I'm like starting to watch movies again because I'm like, that's going to be over in 2 hours and I'll be done. That's the return of the 100.
Okay.
The 100 on the CW is like my number one sort of like cliffhanger, like, I didn't even think I'd watch it because I thought it was just some teen show or something, and I started watching it
Mhm.
one day, and then I found out through interviews that when the producers were making the show, the people at the network told them, don't try to make like your regular CW show. You really can take this, so you push it a lot further. So a lot of people think it's just like another CW show, but it's this really dark, weird science fiction show. And it's returned for its final season now, and I'm like, I haven't tuned in yet, but I'm like, yeah. I'm kind of frustrated that it's the last year because it had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. And it's kind of like it's a little over the top at times. Not everybody likes it, but I really, really dug
Mhm.
it.
Okay. Cool. Well, Brian, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. It was actually pretty interesting.
No worries. Thanks for having me on the
Thank
conversations.
you.